Welcome, everybody. I don't know that there's anyone in my core audience who is still considering supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In November. But if you are, this is yet another story that I think really should expose the nakedly self-centered motivations of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In running for president this time around. Remember when a few weeks ago we learned that RFK went to the Trump campaign and floated the idea of getting out of the race and endorsing Donald Trump if Donald Trump promises a job in his administration. That was too brazen a quid pro quo, even for the Trump campaign, who said, it's going to be very obvious that it's a quid pro quo. This isn't a good idea. There is new reporting from the Washington Post that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tried to do the exact same thing with Kamala Harris. Yeah. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tried to meet with Kamala Harris to discuss cabinet job. Harris has rebuffed the offer of an endorsement, while Kennedy also has had conversations with Republican nominee Donald Trump about his role in an administration. The reporting by Michael Scherer and Josh Dawsey explains that last week, Robert F. Kennedy tried to get a meeting with Kamala Harris to say, hey, I'd like to be in your administration, maybe a cabinet secretary, and in exchange, I would throw my support behind you. Implicit in that would be he would get out of the race, and then if you win, you give me a job. Harris and her advisors have not responded with an offer to meet, nor have they shown interest in the proposal, according to people familiar with the conversation. This took place through intermediaries, and of course, last month we saw the exact same thing done with Donald Trump. Given the difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in terms of policy, vision for America, respect for democracy, et cetera, the idea that Robert F. Kennedy could genuinely, in a deeply held way, say, I would be willing to endorse you, Donald Trump, or I would be willing to endorse you, Kamala Harris, is very difficult to believe unless you understand that it has nothing to do with the politics of Harris or Trump as evaluated by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and rather has everything to do with how can I get myself a job in the administration. Now, it seems very clear at this point that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presence on the ballot helps Kamala Harris and hurts Donald Trump. So there's even a question, if you're Kamala Harris, of why would I even want RFK Jr. to get out? His presence is probably good for me, including in states that now seem to be in play, like, for example, North Carolina. But that's not really the big takeaway for me. We can make the math argument for why Kamala Harris would say, I'd rather he stay in because it's probably good for me. The idea that you could be willing to endorse such diametrically opposed individuals if they give you a job makes it clear that there's an authenticity question here and that we should be questioning the motivations. Now, what he's effectively doing here is shopping an endorsement between Trump and Harris. And what's wild is they both said no, thank you. Now, the other question that I think is relevant here to consider, at least theoretically, is let me back up a little bit. Why, especially now, is it sort of irrelevant to Kamala Harris whether RFK gets out? Why do I say that it's worse for Trump for him to stay in? There was ambiguity and very much mitigated enthusiasm about Joe Biden as a candidate from many on the Democratic side. Since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee after Joe Biden said, I'm not running for re-election, the financial contributions have consolidated around Kamala Harris. The number of undecideds has shriveled and shrunk dramatically as people say, okay, now I see what the options are. Now there is a much more obvious difference here in terms of energy, in terms of everything than there even was with Biden, although there was quite a difference, but it was still, two guys that most of the country felt were too old to be doing this. Now that there is this very clear difference, we see that the number of ambiguous people on the left and even within the independent voters are diminishing dramatically. So that gets us to the next question. If you're not already supporting Kamala Harris, Is an endorsement from RFK going to convince you to support Kamala Harris? I don't think so. And so the other reason why it seems very logical that Kamala Harris is not taking the bait, meeting with RFK or getting involved in this is I would be very skeptical that even if you do it, even if RFK gets out in exchange for this potential future job and says, I'm endorsing Kamala Harris, I don't know that she gets more than 50% of the people still supporting RFK, and it ends up being a wash. Imagine that he gets out and goes, vote for Kamala, and half of his supporters say sure, and half of his supporters say no, which I think is optimistic. She's in the exact same place because she's picked up the same number of votes that Trump has picked up. So I think it's smart of her not to get involved in this, and really just everything falling off the walls for RFK while he publicly says, I'm staying in till the end. He's shopping endorsements and getting out of the race to both of the major party candidates. If you still support this guy, honestly, if you still support this guy, I want to hear from you why. info@davidpakman.com. And don't you care about his nakedly self-centered motivations here in shopping endorsements to two candidates who couldn't be more different?